Tell me about the underground lakes in Antarctica.
Antarctica is a vast, icy continent located in the southern hemisphere. It is the driest, coldest, and windiest continent on Earth, and is largely covered by a thick layer of ice that reaches an average depth of about 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles. Despite its harsh and inhospitable conditions, Antarctica is home to a number of unique and fascinating features, including underground lakes. There are several underground lakes in Antarctica, most of which are located beneath the ice sheet that covers the continent. These lakes are formed when water from melting ice or snow accumulates in natural depressions or hollows in the ground, and then becomes sealed off by overlying layers of ice or sediment. The largest and best known of these underground lakes is Lake Vostok, which is located beneath the Russian Vostok Station in East Antarctica. Lake Vostok is thought to be the largest subglacial lake in the world, and is estimated to be about 250 kilometers, 155 miles, long, 50 kilometers, 31 miles, wide, and up to 500 meters, 1,640 feet, deep. It is believed to have been sealed off from the rest of the world for at least 15 million years, and may contain unique forms of life that have evolved in isolation. Other underground lakes in Antarctica include Lake Mercer, Lake Joyce, and Lake Hodgson. These lakes are smaller than Lake Vostok, but are still significant in size and are thought to be important sources of fresh water for the continent. It should be noted that accessing and studying these underground lakes is extremely challenging due to the extreme conditions of the Antarctic environment and the technical difficulties of drilling through the thick ice sheet. However, scientists are continuing to study these lakes in order to learn more about the history and geology of the continent, as well as the potential for life in extreme environments.
Is there any form of volcanism?
Yes, Antarctica is home to several active volcanoes. The continent is situated over the boundary between the Earth's tectonic plates, and this makes it susceptible to volcanic activity. There are several volcanoes in the Transantarctic Mountains, which run along the eastern side of the continent, and there are also a number of volcanoes in the western part of the continent, including in the Antarctic Peninsula and on the nearby South Shetland Islands. Some of these volcanoes are considered to be active, meaning that they have erupted within the past 10,000 years and are likely to erupt again in the future. One well-known example of an active volcano in Antarctica is Mount Erebus, which is located on Ross Island, near the continent's coast. Mount Erebus is the southernmost active volcano in the world, and has been erupting continuously for at least the past 1,300 years. It is a stratovolcano, which means that it is made up of alternating layers of lava, ash, and other volcanic materials. Other active volcanoes in Antarctica include Deception Island, which is located in the South Shetland Islands, and Mount Berlin, which is located on Alexander Island. These volcanoes have erupted within the past several hundred years, and are considered to be potentially hazardous due to their proximity to research stations and other human settlements. In addition to these active volcanoes, there are also a number of extinct volcanoes in Antarctica, which are no longer active and are not expected to erupt again. These volcanoes are typically older and have been shaped and eroded by wind, ice, and other natural processes over time.
So, in theory, the underwater lakes could have methane-dependent biosphere?
It is possible that the underground lakes in Antarctica could support a methane-based ecosystem. Methane is a chemical compound that is made up of one carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms, and it is a common byproduct of certain types of microbial metabolism. In certain environments, such as those found in some deep-sea sediments and in certain types of wetlands, methane can be produced in large quantities by microorganisms such as methanogenic archaea. Methane is also known to be present in the atmosphere of some planets and moons in our solar system, including Mars and Titan, which is a moon of Saturn. In these cases, methane is thought to be produced by chemical reactions involving water, rock, and other materials, rather than by microbial metabolism. The conditions in the underground lakes in Antarctica are likely to be very different from those found in other environments where methane is known to be present. The lakes are sealed off from the surface and are thought to be very cold and low in oxygen, which could make them inhospitable to many forms of life. However, it is possible that some types of microorganisms, such as methanogenic archaea, could survive and thrive in these conditions by producing methane as a source of energy. It is also worth noting that the presence of methane in an ecosystem does not necessarily mean that the ecosystem is dependent on methane. In some cases, methane may be produced as a byproduct of other metabolic processes, and may not be essential for the survival and growth of the organisms that produce it. Further research is needed to understand the role of methane in the underground lakes of Antarctica and the potential for methane-based ecosystems in these environments.
In the case of underwater lakes, the only source of energy would be methane and other hydrocarbons.
The energy sources available to organisms living in the underground lakes of Antarctica are likely to be limited, given the extreme conditions of these environments. The lakes are sealed off from the surface and are thought to be very cold, low in oxygen, and isolated from sunlight. This means that traditional sources of energy, such as photosynthesis and aerobic respiration, may not be possible. Instead, organisms living in these lakes may rely on other sources of energy, such as methane and other hydrocarbons. Methane is a chemical compound that is made up of one carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms, and it is a common byproduct of certain types of microbial metabolism. In certain environments, such as those found in some deep-sea sediments and in certain types of wetlands, methane can be produced in large quantities by microorganisms such as methanogenic archaea. It is possible that some types of microorganisms living in the underground lakes of Antarctica could produce methane as a source of energy through processes such as methanogenesis. This process involves the conversion of carbon compounds, such as carbon dioxide or organic matter, into methane through the action of specialized enzymes. However, it is worth noting that the availability of methane and other hydrocarbons in the underground lakes of Antarctica is likely to be limited, and these resources may not be sufficient to support a diverse and complex ecosystem. The exact nature of the organisms living in these lakes, and the types of metabolic processes they rely on, is not yet fully understood and is an active area of research.
What are the possible sources of energy?
There are several possible sources of energy that could be available to organisms living in the underground lakes of Antarctica. These energy sources may include chemosynthesis. Some microorganisms, such as certain types of bacteria and archaea, are able to produce energy through chemical reactions with inorganic compounds, rather than through photosynthesis or aerobic respiration. These organisms are known as chemoautotrophs, and they can use energy from the chemical bonds of compounds such as hydrogen gas, sulfur compounds, or methane to produce organic matter from inorganic compounds. Fermentation. Some microorganisms are able to produce energy through the process of fermentation, which is a type of anaerobic metabolism that does not require oxygen. During fermentation, microorganisms convert sugars or other organic compounds into energy, producing byproducts such as ethanol, lactic acid, or acetic acid. Methanogenesis. As mentioned earlier, some types of microorganisms, such as methanogenic archaea, are able to produce methane as a source of energy through the process of methanogenesis. This process involves the conversion of carbon compounds, such as carbon dioxide or organic matter, into methane through the action of specialized enzymes. Other sources. It is possible that other sources of energy, such as geothermal energy or energy from radioactive decay, could be available to organisms living in the underground lakes of Antarctica. However, the exact nature and availability of these energy sources is not yet fully understood, and further research is needed to determine their potential role in supporting life in these extreme environments.
How many calories would the lower trophic levels of such a biosphere amount to? Give me a rough estimate.
It is difficult to estimate the number of calories that the lower trophic levels of a hypothetical methane-based ecosystem in the underground lakes of Antarctica would produce, as this would depend on a variety of factors, including the availability of nutrients, the types of microorganisms present, and the efficiency of the metabolic processes involved. In general, the lower trophic levels of an ecosystem, which include primary producers and primary consumers, are responsible for converting energy from external sources, such as sunlight or chemical energy, into forms that can be used by higher trophic levels, such as herbivores and carnivores. The amount of energy available at each trophic level is typically lower than the amount available at the level below it, due to the loss of energy through metabolism and other processes. In a methane-based ecosystem, the primary producers would be microorganisms that are able to produce energy through processes such as chemosynthesis or methanogenesis, using methane or other hydrocarbons as a source of energy. The primary consumers would be other microorganisms that feed on the primary producers, and the amount of energy available to these organisms would depend on the efficiency of the metabolic processes involved and the availability of nutrients. It is worth noting that the energy requirements of microorganisms are typically much lower than those of larger organisms, such as animals. As a result, the lower trophic levels of a methane-based ecosystem in the underground lakes of Antarctica may not produce a large number of calories relative to other ecosystems. However, the specific energy requirements and metabolism of these organisms is not well understood, and further research is needed to determine their potential role in such an ecosystem.
Let's say we have an area of 500 kilometers covered with autotrophs, with an average density identical to that of microorganisms around fumaroles in the ocean. Could it support multicellular life?
It is not possible to accurately predict whether an area of 500 kilometers covered with chemoautotrophic microorganisms, with an average density similar to that of microorganisms found around fumaroles in the ocean, would be able to support multicellular life. This would depend on a variety of factors, including the specific types of microorganisms present, the availability of nutrients and other resources, and the environmental conditions. In general, multicellular organisms require a diverse and reliable source of energy and nutrients in order to grow and reproduce. Chemosynthetic microorganisms, such as those found around fumaroles in the ocean, are able to produce energy in organic matter using inorganic compounds as a source of energy. However, these microorganisms are typically not able to provide the same level of energy and nutrients as other primary producers, such as plants, which use sunlight as a source of energy. It is also worth noting that multicellular organisms typically require oxygen in order to survive and thrive. The underground lakes of Antarctica are thought to be low in oxygen, which could make it difficult for multicellular organisms to survive in these environments. Overall, it is important to remember that the conditions in the underground lakes of Antarctica are extreme and are not conducive to the growth and reproduction of most forms of life. Further research is needed to understand the potential for life in these environments and the role that chemosynthetic microorganisms may play in supporting such life.
What about on the surface?
The surface of Antarctica is a harsh and inhospitable environment, with extreme temperatures, high winds, and limited access to light and other resources. These conditions make it difficult for most forms of life to survive and thrive on the continent. However, despite these challenges, there are a number of organisms that have adapted to life on the surface of Antarctica. These include a variety of plants, such as lichens and mosses, as well as animals such as seals, penguins, and birds. These organisms have adapted to the harsh conditions of the Antarctic environment in a number of ways. For example, many plants and animals have developed specialized mechanisms for conserving heat and moisture, such as thick layers of insulating fur or feathers. Others have evolved specialized adaptations for finding food, such as the ability to dive to great depths or to travel long distances in search of prey. It is worth noting that the diversity of life on the surface of Antarctica is much lower than in other parts of the world, and many areas of the continent are virtually devoid of life. However, in certain parts of Antarctica, such as the coastal regions and the Antarctic Peninsula, the conditions are somewhat more favorable for life, and a greater variety of plants and animals can be found.
So, is it out of the realm of possibility that there could be megafauna living in the center regions of Antarctica?
It is unlikely that there are any large, multicellular animals, megafauna, living in the central regions of Antarctica. The conditions in these areas are extremely harsh, with low temperatures, high winds, and limited access to light and other resources. These conditions are not conducive to the survival and reproduction of most forms of life, including megafauna. In addition to the challenges posed by the environment, the central regions of Antarctica are also isolated from other landmasses, which means that there are few opportunities for species to colonize or migrate to the continent. This makes it even more unlikely that megafauna could survive in these regions. It is worth noting that the diversity of life on the surface of Antarctica is much lower than in other parts of the world, and many areas of the continent are virtually devoid of life. However, in certain parts of Antarctica, such as the coastal regions and the Antarctic Peninsula, the conditions are somewhat more favorable for life, and a greater variety of plants and animals can be found. These include a number of species of seals, penguins, and birds, as well as a small number of invertebrates, such as mites, spiders, and nematodes.
When was the last time Antarctica had a surface temperature above zero?
Antarctica has not had a surface temperature above 0 degrees Celsius 32 degrees Fahrenheit in millions of years. The continent is located in the southern hemisphere and is surrounded by the Southern Ocean, which is very cold and is kept at a low temperature by the circulation of cold, polar waters. As a result, Antarctica has a very cold and dry climate, with an average annual temperature of about -40 degrees Celsius -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold climate of Antarctica is due in large part to the fact that the continent is covered by a thick layer of ice that reaches an average depth of about 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles. This ice sheet acts as a thermal blanket, insulating the land beneath and preventing heat from escaping. As a result, the surface temperature of the ice sheet is typically much colder than the air temperature, and can reach as low as -70 degrees Celsius -94 degrees Fahrenheit in some areas. It is worth noting that the temperature of Antarctica has varied over time, and there is evidence that the continent was much warmer during some periods in the past. For example, during the early Eocene epoch, which occurred about 55 million years ago, Antarctica is thought to have had a temperate climate and was home to a variety of plants and animals. However, over time, the continent cooled and the ice sheet began to form, eventually leading to the extremely cold and dry climate that exists today.
The notion that Antarctica hides ancient civilizations is far-fetched, right?
There is no scientific evidence to support the idea that Antarctica has ever been home to ancient civilizations or that it is currently hiding such civilizations. Antarctica is a vast, icy continent located in the southern hemisphere and is known for its extreme and inhospitable conditions. The continent is covered by a thick layer of ice that reaches an average depth of about 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, and is home to a small number of scientific research stations and a few other human settlements. There have been many myths and legends about Antarctica over the years, and some people have suggested that the continent may be hiding ancient civilizations or other secrets. However, these claims are not supported by scientific evidence and are generally considered to be unfounded. It is important to remember that scientific research and exploration of Antarctica are ongoing, and new discoveries about the continent's geology, climate, and biology are made regularly. However, these discoveries are based on rigorous scientific investigation and analysis, and are not influenced by myths or legends.